The nebula stretched across the viewing portal like spilled watercolors, its purples and blues swirling against the eternal black. Alara Miles pressed her palm against the transparent aluminum and felt the subtle vibration of Titan Station beneath her fingertips. In the reflection, she could see the holographic display behind her, still cycling through the same terrifying statistics she'd been reviewing for weeks. Krathox Prime, intoned the artificial voice of the Galactic Menagerie database. Classification: Apex Predator. Threat Assessment: Maximum. Confirmed kills: 2,873. Survivors of direct encounter: 0. Alara turned from the window, facing the hovering display. The creature, rendered in perfect holographic detail, rotated slowly before her, 6 muscular arms ending in razor claws, a carapace of overlapping plates that shimmered with an iridescent black-green, and jaws that could crush titanium alloy. The simulation depicted acid blood dripping from its serrated mandibles, each drop capable of eating through standard military-grade armor in seconds. "Pause display," she commanded, and the hologram froze. Alara circled the suspended image, studying the creature from every angle. 3 millennia of galactic doctrine had been clear: containment, isolation, and if necessary, immediate termination. Never negotiation, never cooperation. Yet, here she was, preparing to defy everything the United Stellar Powers had agreed upon since first contact with the Krathox species. The door to her quarters hissed open. Fleet Admiral Jimenez entered, his weathered face set in the permanent scowl that had earned him the nickname Stonefront among the lower ranks. "Dr. Miles," he said, dispensing with pleasantries. "The Security Council wants an update. They're getting nervous." Alara didn't look away from the hologram. "They were nervous when they approved this mission. Admiral, that hasn't changed. What's changed is that we've spent 3 months of resources on your experiment." He gestured at the data screens covering her walls. "The Menagerie classification stands uncontested for a reason. 53 armed encounters, 53 massacres, and 0 attempts at behavioral modification," Alara countered, finally turning to face him. "We've only ever tried to kill them or contain them, never to understand them." The Admiral's expression didn't soften. "The wagering pool among my officers has your survival time at less than 30 minutes. The most optimistic bet is 2 hours. I didn't realize xenopsychology had become a spectator sport. This isn't a joke, Doctor. The political directorate is calling this mission suicidal. The only reason you got approval is because Earth needs a military advantage that doesn't require bleeding our economy, dry building more dreadnoughts." Alara walked to her desk and picked up a small device, her custom neural translator, still in prototype stage. "The Krathox arrive tomorrow. I'll have my preliminary assessment within 72 hours. Admiral Jimenez stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You realize if this fails, it's not just your life at stake? If that thing escapes—" "It won't!" Alara's voice was steady. "But understand this, Admiral. My goal isn't conquest. It's cooperation. The Krathox aren't mindless killing machines. They're intelligent, social, and adapted for a world we can barely comprehend. If we can forge a connection, then Earth gets its weapon." Jimenez finished. Alara shook her head. "Then we gain an ally. There's a difference." After the Admiral left, Alara returned to the hologram. "Resume display," she commanded. The simulation continued its slow rotation. Those deadly arms flexing in a rhythm she'd begun to recognize wasn't random, but patterned, possibly communicative. On her desk sat a small vial of synthesized pheromones, derived from samples collected at great cost from the Krathox homeworld. Beside it lay handwritten notes on pack behavior observed from the only successful long-range surveillance ever conducted. Earth was a junior power in the galactic community, outgunned and outmaneuvered by civilizations with millennia of head start in the stars. But Alara wasn't interested in building better weapons. Her specialty, the reason she'd been recruited despite vocal opposition, was empathy-based xenopsychology, understanding the emotional framework of non-human intelligence. She touched the translator at her throat. A nervous habit. Tomorrow she would meet the most dangerous creature known to exist. Not with guns or force fields, but with a radical hypothesis that beneath the killing instinct of even the universe's perfect predator, there might exist the capacity for connection. The transport vessel carrying Krathox Prime entered Titan's atmosphere precisely at 0600 hours. Alara watched from the command center as the reinforced containment unit was transferred through 5 separate security checkpoints, each with deadlier contingency protocols than the last. "Final approach to behavior modification bay," announced the security chief. On the monitors, the massive container, 3 times the size of standard quarantine units, moved through pressurized corridors lined with armed personnel. "Security team, stand down," Alara ordered, earning startled looks from the military staff. "Dr. Miles," protested Lieutenant Savick, the head of station security. "Protocol dictates." "Protocol dictates what we've always done," Alara interrupted. "And what we've always done has resulted in violence. We're trying something new." She tapped her comm badge. "This is Dr. Alara Miles. All armed personnel are to withdraw from the final corridor. Automated systems only for the transfer." The security chief looked to Admiral Jimenez, who had positioned himself in the corner of the command center. After a tense moment, he nodded once. "You heard the doctor," Savick said reluctantly. "Withdraw to secondary positions." Alara left the command center, making her way to the custom enclosure she'd spent months designing. Unlike the Stark containment cells, typically used for dangerous specimens, this space incorporated elements from the Krathox homeworld, a careful balance of atmospheric pressure, gravity modulation, and ambient sounds recorded from their native hunting grounds. She entered the observation room adjacent to the enclosure, separated only by a transparent barrier engineered to withstand pressures that would crush a standard starship hull. The chamber beyond was enormous, with varied terrain including rock formations and a small pool of liquid that matched the chemical composition of Krathoxian seas. "Beginning final transfer," came the announcement over her comm. Through the corridor window, she watched as the container was moved into position by robotic arms. No human personnel remained within 50 meters. Standard safety protocol. "Dr. Miles," came Admiral Jimenez's voice. "Last chance to reconsider your approach." Alara touched her translator. "Proceed with the transfer." The container's exterior shield deactivated. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the reinforced door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. At first, there was only darkness within. Then came a sound, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the station's structure itself. Alara felt it in her chest, in her bones. A massive form unfolded from the shadows, 6 limbs extending in a motion both fluid and terrifying. The Krathox emerged into the light of the enclosure, its carapace catching the artificial sunlight in iridescent ripples. It stood nearly 4 meters tall, its body a perfect fusion of predatory adaptations from a dozen Earth species. The power of a grizzly, the speed of a cheetah, the killing efficiency of a mantis shrimp, all magnified tenfold. Its head swiveled, sensory organs Alara had only seen in simulations twitching as it processed its new environment. Then those eyes, 6 of them, arranged in a pattern that allowed for perfect 360-degree vision, fixed directly on the observation window, directly on her. The creature charged, even prepared for the speed. Alara couldn't help stepping back as tons of lethal predator slammed into the barrier between them. The transparent material held, but the impact was so violent that warning klaxons sounded throughout the sector. "Barrier integrity at 97%. reported the station's AI. Recalibrating. The Krathox didn't retreat. It pressed against the barrier, those 6 eyes studying her with an intelligence that no hologram had captured. One clawed hand scraped experimentally against the surface, leaving microscopically thin scratches in material designed to withstand meteoric impacts. Alara stepped forward again, placing her palm against the barrier, directly opposite one of the creature's hands. The Krathox's growl deepened, vibrating through the structure. "Hello," she said softly. Her translator processed the word, converting it to a series of low-frequency pulses that mimicked Krathoxian pack signals. "I'm Alara." The creature's response was immediate and violent. It reared back and slammed all 6 arms against the barrier simultaneously. The impact so powerful that Alara was thrown backward. She caught herself against the monitoring console as alarms blared. "Barrier integrity at 89%, the AI announced. "Security teams deploying." "Belay that," Alara countermanded, regaining her footing. "It's testing boundaries. This is normal behavior." The Krathox paced now, never taking its eyes off her. Its movements had a precision that belied its massive size, each step calculated, each sweep of its limbs controlled. "That's it," Alara murmured, more to herself than the creature. "Show me who you are." For the next 6 hours, she remained at the observation window, documenting every movement, every sound. The Krathox alternated between periods of frenetic activity, charging the barrier, climbing the rock formations with startling agility, and stillness so complete it might have been mistaken for a statue. During one of these still periods, Alara activated the feeding system. A panel opened in the enclosure floor, and a synthesized nutrient mixture, designed to match the protein profile of the Krathox's natural prey, rose on a platform. The creature ignored it. "Interesting," Alara noted into her recorder. "Subject displays no immediate feeding response despite 72-hour fast during transport." By the time Admiral Jimenez returned to check on her progress, night cycle had begun on the station. "Anything to report?" he asked, eyeing the Krathox, which had positioned itself atop the highest rock formation, its silhouette menacing against the simulated moonlight. "It's intelligent," Alara said. "More than the records indicated. It's not just reacting, it's analyzing. It spent the first hour mapping every centimeter of the enclosure, including the locations of all monitoring devices." "That's supposed to be reassuring?" "It means we can communicate," Alara replied. "Eventually." The Admiral's frown deepened. "The Security Council is meeting tomorrow. They'll want tangible progress." Alara didn't look away from the enclosure. "Science doesn't operate on political timelines. Admiral, tell them I've begun baseline behavioral assessment." After he left, Alara continued her vigil. The Krathox hadn't moved from its perch, but she could feel its attention fixed on her, like a physical weight. "I know you're watching me too," she said softly. "Let's learn about each other." The first week passed in a similar pattern. The Krathox tested every aspect of its enclosure, probing for weaknesses with an intelligence that confirmed Alara's suspicions about the species' cognitive abilities. It refused food, ignored the environmental enrichment items she introduced, and reacted with explosive violence whenever she attempted translator communication. On the 8th day, she made her first modification to the protocol. "You're introducing what?" asked Dr. Rao, the station's senior xenobiologist, his 4 eyes blinking in alarm patterns that his species displayed when deeply concerned. "Pheromone-enriched protein gel," Alara explained, showing him the formula on her datapad. "Infused with trace elements from the Krathox homeworld." "The Security Council hasn't approved this," Raul protested, his skin flushing the deep orange of agitation. "The Council approved my mission parameters, which include progressive behavioral modification techniques." Alara continued preparing the mixture, carefully measuring compounds that had cost Earth's treasury a small fortune to synthesize. "This is a gift." "The Krathox don't understand gifts," Raul countered. They understand killing and territory. That's all. Alara looked up from her work. With respect, Doctor, that's an assumption based on limited observation. We've never attempted non-aggressive interaction. Because the first scientific team that tried to study them was dismembered. Raal's voice rose slightly. I knew two of the researchers personally. Alara's hands stilled. I'm sorry for your loss, but those researchers approached with scanning equipment and containment tools. I'm approaching with understanding. She finished preparing the mixture and loaded it into a delivery canister. When she returned to the observation room, the Krathox was pacing again, its movements becoming more agitated as the days of captivity accumulated. Alara activated the small delivery port, a narrow tube that extended from the wall of the enclosure. The Krathox immediately focused on the new element in its environment, dropping into a defensive crouch. It's all right, Alara said softly, her translator converting her words into low vibrations. This is for you. The protein gel oozed slowly from the tube, collecting in a small depression in the rocky floor. The scent, imperceptible to human senses but potent to Krathoxian chemoreceptors, filled the enclosure. The reaction was immediate. The Krathox's sensory appendages flared, and it made a sound Alara hadn't heard before, a clicking, trilling noise that made the hairs on her arms stand up. For several minutes, the creature remained motionless, attention fixed on the small pool of gel. Then, with a speed that made Alara gasp, it crossed the enclosure and circled the offering, examining it from every angle. Subject demonstrates caution, Alara recorded, suggesting cognitive assessment rather than instinctual response. What happened next exceeded her most optimistic projections. The Krathox extended a single claw and touched the gel, bringing a tiny sample to what passed for its mouth. After tasting, it consumed the entire offering in one swift motion. Then it looked directly at Alara through the barrier and made the trilling sound again. Food acceptance on first offering, she noted, struggling to keep excitement from her voice. Possible vocalization of satisfaction, interest? Over the next 3 days, Alara repeated the process, each time accompanying the offering with simple translator communications. Basic concepts like food, good, and friend, converted into the vibrational patterns that her research suggested might approximate Krathoxian communication. On the 4th day, when the feeding tube extended, the Krathox was waiting. It approached not with aggression, but with what Alara could only interpret as anticipation. Progress report, demanded Admiral Jimenez when he visited that evening. The council is getting impatient. Alara showed him the footage of the day's feeding. It's responding to consistent positive interaction. No barrier testing for 36 hours now. So it's accepting food, the Admiral said, unimpressed. That's a far cry from the military asset Earth Command was promised. This was never going to be an overnight process, Alara replied evenly. We're establishing basic trust. Trust? Jimenez laughed harshly. Dr. Miles, that thing is waiting for an opportunity. The moment that barrier fails, if that were true, it would still be testing the barrier constantly, Alara interrupted. Instead, it's engaging with the enrichment I've provided. It's learning. The Admiral studied her for a moment. You have 1 month. After that, if you can't demonstrate significant progress toward behavioral control, the Council will revert to standard containment protocols. Alara knew what that meant. Permanent stasis, or worse, termination. I understand. After Jimenez left, Alara returned to her observations. The Krathox had settled into what she now recognized as its resting position, 4 limbs tucked under its body, the upper 2 folded across its carapace. The posture exposed vulnerable areas, something it had never done in the first week. You're starting to feel safe, she whispered. That's good. That's the beginning. The next phase of Alara's protocol involved more complex communication attempts. drawing from the limited field observations of Krathoks in their natural habitat. She began incorporating postural shifts and movements that might approximate their pack language. Standing before the barrier, she demonstrated a head tilt that researchers had observed during non-aggressive Krathoks interactions. The creature watched her intently, but made no response. Day after day, she repeated the gestures, always accompanying them with the same translator phrases. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, changes began to emerge in the Krathoks's behavior. It started mirroring her movements. Not exactly, but with its own anatomical interpretation. When she pressed her palm against the barrier, it would press one of its claws to the same spot. When she performed the head tilt, it would angle its sensory apparatus in a similar fashion. Behavioral mirroring observed, Alara recorded, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. Suggesting rudimentary communication pathways are being established. Dr. Rao remained skeptical. Mimicry is not understanding, he warned during their weekly consultation. Many predators use mirroring to lull prey into complacency. I'm aware of the risks, Alara assured him. But there's more happening here than predatory deception. The consistent engagement with enrichment activities, the decreased territorial displays. These suggest genuine behavioral modification, or adaptation for purposes of escape, Ral countered. The xenobiologist's caution wasn't unfounded. Despite the progress, there were moments that reminded Alara of the Krathoks's lethal nature. During a routine maintenance check of the environmental systems, a technician had approached the barrier too quickly. The Krathoks's response had been immediate and terrifying. A full aggressive display, complete with acid secretion that had sizzled against the enclosure floor. These incidents became the focus of the Security Council's concerns. 3 weeks into the experiment, Alara found herself defending her work via holographic conference to a panel of stern-faced officials. The incident reports suggest unpredictable behavioral patterns, stated Counselor Voss, her silver hair gleaming under the chamber lights. How can you guarantee control if the creature's responses remain inconsistent? With respect, Counselor, we're not seeing inconsistency. We're seeing context-dependent responses. Alara explained. The Krathoks reacts differently to me than to unfamiliar personnel. That's progress. Progress toward what end? Asked another counselor. The mission parameters called for behavioral modification sufficient to establish control for military applications. Control through cooperation. Alara emphasized. Not domination. The Krathok species evolved as pack hunters with complex social hierarchies. Our approach leverages those innate tendencies. The debate continued for hours, with Alara presenting data that showed gradual but measurable changes in the creature's behavior. In the end, the Council granted her a 2-week extension, but with conditions. A practical demonstration will be required, Counselor Voss declared. Something that proves the creature can be directed in a tactical scenario. After the conference, Alara returned to the observation room, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. The Krathoks was in its now familiar resting pose, but as she entered, it rose and approached the barrier. They want me to turn you into a weapon, she said softly, her translator off. But that's not who you are, is it? Not all you are. The creature made the trilling sound that had become more frequent in their interactions. Alara had begun to associate it with recognition or greeting. She activated her translator. Hello, friend, she sent through the vibrational patterns. The Krathoks responded with a series of clicks and low rumbles. Though the translator couldn't yet interpret these sounds with confidence, Alara had begun to recognize patterns, variations in pitch and rhythm that seemed to carry meaning. We're making progress, she told it. But we need to move faster now. The next day, Alara implemented the most controversial element of her protocol, environmental synchronization. The enclosure's atmospheric conditions were gradually shifted to match her observation room. removing the last artificial differentiation between their spaces. "This is reckless," Admiral Jimenez objected when he discovered the modification. "You're removing safety buffers." "I'm removing barriers to true interaction," Alara corrected. "The physical barrier remains at full strength." The Admiral studied the Krathox, which was observing their conversation with unnerving focus. "It's listening to us, isn't it?" "Yes," Alara confirmed. "It's been cataloging our language patterns since arrival. Its species evolved to hunt prey that communicates through complex vocalizations. Pattern recognition is hardwired into its cognition. So it understands what we're saying? Not the specific words, but the communicative intent? Increasingly, yes." As if to confirm her assessment, the Krathox made a sound that approximated the rhythmic pattern of Alara's speech. Then, Jimenez's deeper tones. The Admiral stepped back involuntarily. "That's unsettling." "That's communication," Alara corrected. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. During Titan's seasonal storm cycle, the atmospheric disturbances created power fluctuations throughout the station, causing momentary lapses in the environmental systems. Alara was in the observation room when the lights flickered, and the barrier between her and the Krathox shimmered visibly. A microsecond disruption in the field integrity. The creature noticed. Its entire posture changed, predatory instinct overriding the weeks of conditioning. It charged the barrier at full speed, hitting at precisely the spot where the fluctuation had occurred. Alarms blared. "Barrier integrity at 67%, announced the station AI. "Emergency protocols initiating." Security teams would be mobilizing, preparing for containment breach procedures, which, Alara knew, meant lethal force authorization. "Override emergency protocols. Authorization Miles Theta 9, she commanded. "Override denied," the AI responded. "Security directive supersedes research authority." The Krathox slammed against the barrier again. "Integrity at 58%. Alara made a split-second decision. Instead of retreating, she stepped closer to the barrier, directly in the path of the creature's assault. She raised her hands, palms outward, and performed the head tilt gesture that had become part of their communication routine. "Friend," she said through the translator. "Safe." The Krathox paused, its 6 eyes fixed on her. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, Alara felt the full weight of 3 millennia of evolutionary perfection assessing her. Then, slowly, the creature backed away from the barrier. "Stand down, security teams," Alara ordered into her comm. "Situation stabilized." "Teams are in position, Doctor," came Lieutenant Savik's tense reply. "We have breach protocols ready." "There is no breach," Alara insisted. "The Krathox responded to my direction. Document this incident. It's our first crisis response success. After the storm passed and systems returned to normal, Alara remained in the observation room, processing what had happened. The Krathox had recognized a vulnerability, acted on instinct, but then responded to her intervention. It had chosen communication over opportunity. When Admiral Jimenez reviewed the security footage, his assessment was less optimistic. "It attacked the barrier the moment it detected weakness," he pointed out. "That's not the behavior of a domesticated asset." "No one said anything about domestication," Alara replied. "We're establishing communication and cooperation. The fact that it responded to my signal by backing down, that's the breakthrough." "Or it's learning to manipulate you," the Admiral countered. "Playing the long game?" Alara shook her head. "That would require a level of deceptive reasoning that even our most advanced psychological models don't support." "You're anthropomorphizing a killing machine, Doctor." "No," Alara said firmly. "I'm recognizing intelligence in a form unfamiliar to us. There's a difference." As the deadline for her demonstration approached, Alara intensified her communication sessions. She introduced more complex concepts through the translator: sequential commands, spatial directions, response and reward patterns. The Krathox's learning curve was steep, It began to anticipate her requests, performing behaviors before the translator had finished converting her words. It started creating its own vocalizations that seemed designed to be understandable to her, simpler than its natural communication patterns. They were building a language together. 4 days before the Security Council's deadline, Alara made her final protocol modification. She adjusted the barrier controls to create a small opening, no larger than her hand, at waist height. "Dr. Miles, this action violates containment protocols," the station AI warned. "Log my authorization code and proceed," Alara instructed. The barrier shimmered, and a small section disappeared. Immediately, the atmosphere from the enclosure mixed with that of the observation room, the first direct physical connection between their environments. The Krathox noticed instantly, its sensory appendages flaring. It approached slowly, examining the opening from a distance. Alara knelt beside the opening, her heart pounding so hard she was certain the creature could sense it. She placed a small container beside the hole. Inside was a nutrient gel infused with the most complex pheromone mixture yet, designed to evoke Krathoxian pack bonding responses. "For you," she said, her translator converting the words. "Friend." Hours passed. The Krathox circled the enclosure, occasionally approaching the opening, but never coming close enough to reach the offering. Security teams monitored the situation from a distance, tranquilizer weapons charged to maximum. Near the end of the station's day cycle, when Alara had almost given up hope, the creature finally approached, moving with deliberate slowness. It extended a single claw toward the opening. Alara remained perfectly still as the lethal appendage passed through the barrier, entering her space. The claw, capable of shredding military-grade armor, delicately lifted the container. For a moment, it remained there, half in her world, half in its own. Then the Krathox withdrew, taking the offering back into the enclosure. It consumed the gel while maintaining eye contact with Alara. "Initial physical contact established," she recorded, her voice shaking slightly. "Subject demonstrated precision control and non-aggressive intent." That night, unable to sleep, Alara reviewed her notes from the Wolf Reconciliation Project that had defined her early career. The failure that still haunted her. Earth's attempts to reintegrate genetically modified wolves into the recovering North American ecosystems had ended in disaster. She had misread key behavioral signals, resulting in attacks that set conservation efforts back by decades. The parallels weren't lost on her. Both projects involved predators with complex social structures. Both required translating between fundamentally different communication systems. But the differences were equally stark. The wolves had been acting on instinct, responding to territorial imperatives coded into their DNA. The Krathox was demonstrating adaptation, learning, even innovation in their interactions. It was making choices. The day before the Security Council's deadline, Alara made her most daring move yet. She entered the final command sequence into her console. Full barrier deactivation. "Warning," stated the AI. "This action requires Level 1 security clearance. Override with Science Director authorization, code Miles Epsilon 3. Secondary authorization required." Alara hesitated, then spoke again. "Computer, log this statement. I, Dr. Alara Miles, take full personal responsibility for the consequences of this action. No other personnel are to be held accountable." A pause, then, "Statement logged, awaiting secondary authorization." She hadn't expected this. The system was demanding approval from someone with higher clearance, likely Admiral Jimenez or a council member. The intercom activated. "My office. Now." Admiral Jimenez's voice was cold with fury. When she arrived at the Admiral's office, he was standing behind his desk, security footage from the observation room playing on the wall screen. "You were going to remove the barrier," he said. Not a question. "The only thing standing between that creature and every person on this station." I was going to take the next logical step in the protocol, Alara replied calmly. The Krathox has demonstrated consistent, non-aggressive responses to my presence. Based on what? A few feeding sessions? Some primitive mimicry? Jimenez slammed his hand on the desk. This isn't a laboratory curiosity. Doctor, it's the deadliest known predator in charted space. Which is precisely why traditional containment approaches have failed, Alara countered. The Krathox is intelligent enough to recognize and resent imprisonment. We need to establish trust. Trust, the Admiral repeated incredulously. The Security Council doesn't want a friend for you, Doctor. They want a controllable asset. Something that can give Earth leverage in a galaxy where we're outmatched at every turn. Alara met his gaze steadily. And they'll get it. But not through fear or dominance. The Krathox species evolved as pack hunters, with hierarchical social structures. They understand cooperation, collective action, mutual protection. That's the key. You're betting the lives of everyone on this station on a theory. I'm betting on recognition of intelligence wherever it exists, Alara replied. Tomorrow is the demonstration. Let me prepare in my own way. The Admiral studied her for a long moment. The barrier stays up during the demonstration. That's non-negotiable. Fine, Alara conceded. But I need one thing from Earth Command. You're hardly in a position to make demands. Not a demand. A request for resources. She placed a data chip on his desk. These coordinates on the Krathox homeworld. I need a specimen retrieved and delivered by morning. Jimenez picked up the chip skeptically. What specimen? A hatchling, Alara said simply. A young Krathox. The Admiral's eyes widened. You want to introduce another one of these things to the station? Have you lost your mind? It's the final piece, Alara insisted. The key to everything we've been working toward. Absolutely not, and the Council would never. The Council wants results, Alara interrupted. This is how we get them. After a tense silence, Jimenez inserted the chip into his terminal, reviewing the data. This would require a stealth insertion to a quarantined world. Significant risk to personnel. Remote drone retrieval, Alara suggested. The coordinates are precise. A nesting area away from adult population centers. The risk is manageable. The Admiral's expression remained skeptical, but Alara could see he was considering it. And if I authorize this insanity, you guarantee a successful demonstration tomorrow? I guarantee a breakthrough, Alara replied carefully. The rest depends on whether Earth Command wants a weapon or an ally. The Council members arrived the following morning, their faces grim with anticipation of failure. Alara met them in the station's conference room, where Admiral Jimenez was already briefing them on security protocols. Dr. Miles, acknowledged Counselor Voss with a curt nod. We understand you've prepared a demonstration of the subject's behavioral compliance. I've prepared a demonstration of communication and cooperation, Alara corrected gently. If you'll follow me to the observation facility. As they walked, Alara noted the increased security presence throughout the corridors. Armed personnel at every junction, emergency containment fields on standby. The station was prepared for disaster. Has the package been delivered? She asked Admiral Jimenez quietly. He nodded once. Secured in Laboratory 3 as requested. I still think this is madness. Noted, Alara replied. But sometimes madness is just innovation that hasn't been validated yet. When they reached the observation room, the Council members took positions behind the reinforced secondary barrier. The Krathox was alert in its enclosure, sensing the increased activity. Before we begin, Alara addressed the assembly. I want to clarify the nature of this project. We are not attempting to domesticate or subjugate the Krathox. We are establishing a relationship based on mutual recognition and respect. Very poetic, Doctor, said one of the counselors dryly. But Earth Command requires tangible results. And you'll have them, Alara assured him. But first, I need to introduce the final element of the protocol." She nodded to a technician, who wheeled in a small containment unit. Inside, visible through a transparent panel, was a juvenile Krathox, no larger than a Terran wolf cub, its carapace still soft and pale compared to the adult's formidable armor. Gasps and murmurs spread through the observers. "This is reckless endangerment of a minor life form," protested Dr. Rowell, his skin flushing deep orange. "This is a necessary step," Alara countered, "and one I don't take lightly." She approached the barrier, separating her from the adult Krathox. The creature had gone completely still, its attention fixed on the small container. "Computer, prepare for barrier deactivation on my mark," Alara commanded. "Dr. Miles," Admiral Jimenez's voice was sharp with warning. The agreement was that the barrier would remain up during the demonstration." Alara interrupted. "This is part of the demonstration." Before anyone could object further, she continued. "Deactivate barrier, Section 3 only. Authorization Miles Omega-7. A 2-meter section of the barrier disappeared, creating an opening between Alara and the Krathox. Chaos erupted among the observers. Security personnel raised weapons. Council members shouted objections, but Alara's attention remained fixed on the predator before her. The Krathox didn't move. Its sensory appendages flared, processing the sudden absence of the barrier that had separated them for weeks. "Hello, friend," Alara said, her translator converting the words into vibrations. She performed the now familiar head tilt that had become part of their communication routine. The creature responded with a series of clicks and trills, the vocalization pattern Alara had come to associate with recognition. Slowly, deliberately, she knelt and opened the small container, lifting out the juvenile Krathox. The young creature squirmed in her hands, making high-pitched sounds of distress. "It's all right," she murmured, though she knew the hatchling couldn't understand her. "You're going home." The adult Krathox's posture changed instantly, a defensive stance that Alara had seen in the holovids of pack behavior. Not aggression toward her, but protection toward the young. Heart pounding, Alara took a step forward, then another, crossing the threshold where the barrier had been. She was now inside the enclosure, within striking distance of the universe's perfect killing machine, with no protection, save the understanding they had built together. "Security teams stand ready," came Jimenez's tense order over the comm. "Non-lethal options first if possible." Alara ignored him, continuing her slow approach. When she was 3 meters from the Krathox, she stopped and gently placed the hatchling on the ground between them. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, the adult Krathox remained motionless. Then it dropped to a lower posture, extending 2 of its 6 arms in a gesture Alara had never seen before. The hatchling scurried toward the adult, climbing into the embrace of those deadly limbs. The adult lifted the young one to its chest, making a sound deeper and more resonant than any Alara had heard from it before. "Parental response confirmed," Alara said softly into her recorder. "Cross-generational recognition intact despite artificial breeding." She took another step closer, now within immediate striking range. The adult Krathox watched her, still cradling the hatchling. "Friend," Alara said through the translator, "safe, together." Slowly, she extended her hand, palm up, the same gesture she had used in their earliest interactions through the barrier. The Krathox lowered its massive head, one of its free arms extended. The lethal claw that could shred metal now controlled with incredible precision. It touched Alara's palm with just the tip of a single appendage, the lightest possible contact. Behind her, Alara could hear the stunned silence of the observers. Even the security teams had lowered their weapons in shock. "Cooperation established," she announced, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "The Krathox recognizes me as a non-threat, accepts my presence in its territory, and acknowledges the protection I provided to its young. In their social structure, this creates a bond of obligation and trust. The creature made a series of sounds, complex vocalizations that her translator struggled to process, but that had the unmistakable cadence of communication. "It's talking to you," said Counselor Voss, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Alara confirmed. "We've been developing a shared language. Primitive still, but growing." As if to demonstrate, the Krathox gently set the hatchling down and made a gesture with its upper limbs, a movement that mirrored Alara's own communication signals. The hatchling immediately responded, scurrying to a position behind the adult. "It's instructing the young one," Alara explained, "teaching it that I'm not a threat." Admiral Jimenez approached the edge of the observation area, his expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. "Can it follow tactical directions? Can it be deployed in combat situations?" The question broke the spell of the moment, reminding Alara of the military imperative behind the project. "It can understand complex instructions," she said carefully, "but deployment would require a foundation of mutual respect, not servitude." She turned back to the Krathox. "Would you help us protect our people?" she asked through the translator, accompanying the words with gestures they had practiced. The creature's response was a series of movements and sounds that Alara was still learning to interpret. But the intent seemed clear, a conditional affirmative. "I believe," she told the assembled officials, "that we have the beginning of an agreement." The aftermath of the demonstration shook Earth Command to its foundations. Admiral Jimenez ordered a complete evacuation of the sector surrounding the Krathox enclosure, a standard security response, but maintained the ceasefire Alara had established. For 3 days, Alara remained with the Krathox and its hatchling, sleeping on a cot brought into the observation room, continuing their communication sessions with a new intensity now that the barrier between them had been removed. On the 4th day, the impossible happened. The Krathox, with the hatchling riding on its carapace, followed Alara from the enclosure into the main laboratory complex. Scientists scattered. Security personnel raised weapons. But Alara calmly continued walking, talking softly to the creature through her translator. "This is where I work," she explained. "These are my pack members. They are afraid of you, but they won't hurt you." The Krathox made a rumbling sound that vibrated through the deck plating. Its posture remained relaxed, 6 eyes scanning the unfamiliar environment with obvious intelligence. "It's contained?" asked a trembling technician, pressed against a far wall. "It's cooperating," Alara corrected. "There's a difference." News of the breakthrough spread through Earth's colonies and outposts. The galactic press dubbed the Krathox Alpha Ambassador, running feature stories about humanity's unprecedented diplomatic asset. Images of Alara, walking beside the massive predator through Titan Station's corridors, became iconic, symbolizing a new approach to interspecies relations. The Security Council, seeing the potential beyond their original military focus, authorized the formation of the Interspecies Cohesion Fleet, a specialized unit designed around the unique capabilities of the Krathox and the communication protocols Alara had established. "We're not weaponizing them," Alara insisted during the planning sessions. "We're partnering with them." Over the following months, as more Krathox were carefully introduced to the program, Alara refined her methods. She trained mixed crews of humans and what the media now called reformed predators, though she disliked the term. There was nothing reformed about them. They were simply being understood for the first time. The true test came 6 months after the initial breakthrough, when border skirmishes erupted in the Cygnus sector. Earth colonies, perpetually vulnerable to incursions from more established galactic powers, faced systematic raids that military vessels were too slow to counter. The Council deployed the Cohesion Fleet, 3 ships, each with a Krathox tactical lead working in concert with human crews. Alara accompanied the flagship, continuing her role as primary communicator. When they reached the disputed territory, instead of opening fire, the fleet took up a formation that the Krathox lead had suggested, a positioning that, in their native hunting strategy, signaled not aggression, but territorial warning. The raiding vessels, faced with an unfamiliar configuration and the unmistakable silhouette of Krathox visible through the flagship's viewing ports, retreated without a single shot fired. They recognized the threat display. Alara explained to Admiral Jimenez via subspace communication. The Krathox hunting stance is instinctively understood by most predatory species. It's a universal language of power. So they backed down without combat, the Admiral mused. Impressive, but hardly the decisive military advantage we had hoped for. On the contrary, Alara countered, we achieved our objective without casualties, resource expenditure, or escalation. That's the definition of tactical superiority. As the Cohesion Fleet's successes mounted, its mission expanded. What had begun as a defensive initiative evolved into a diplomatic corps uniquely suited to navigating the complex power dynamics of interstellar politics. The watershed moment came on Varland 4, a contested world where a century-long stalemate had resulted in entrenched positions and routine bloodshed. The Cohesion Fleet arrived not as combatants, but as neutral intermediaries, with the Krathox serving as living symbols of transformed aggression. Alara, now recognized throughout the sector as the architect of the program, led the negotiations. We bring a perspective uniquely suited to this conflict, she told the assembled representatives. We understand both the instinct for dominance and the greater strength found in cooperation. The Krathox that had started it all, the first to form a bond with Alara, now known among the crew as Prime, stood beside her during the talks. Its presence, once a source of terror, now commanded a different kind of respect. When the peace treaty was signed 2 weeks later, ending a conflict that had claimed millions of lives, the galactic community took notice. Former enemies joined under a cooperative charter, directly inspired by the principles Alara had established with the Krathox. Most significantly, the Galactic Menagerie Database, that ancient repository of xenobiological threat assessments, underwent its first major revision in centuries. The entry for Krathox Prime, once characterized solely by its killing efficiency, now included a new designation, demonstrates highest known capacity for empathic cooperation when approached through appropriate communication protocols. In her quarters aboard the flagship, Alara sat reviewing the latest communication data. Her translator had evolved into a sophisticated interface, capable of conveying complex concepts between humans and Krathox with growing accuracy. A soft trill at her door announced Prime's arrival. The massive predator entered with the fluid grace that still amazed her, even after all these months. The juvenile, no longer a hatchling but not yet fully grown, followed close behind, its movements an echo of the adult's precision. The new communication module is ready for testing, Alara said, her translator converting her words. Would you like to try it? Prime made a series of sounds that the translator interpreted as affirmative. The technology wasn't perfect. There were still nuances of Krathoxian communication that defied direct conversion, but the gap was closing. As they worked through the calibration process, Alara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From mortal fear to mutual trust, from isolation to collaboration. She had overcome her own doubts, the painful memories of past failures, the institutional resistance to her methods. She thought of Admiral Jimenez, who had begun as her greatest skeptic and gradually become one of the program's strongest advocates, of Dr. Rahl, who had recently published a groundbreaking paper on Krathoxian cognitive structures that overturned centuries of misconceptions. A notification chimed on her console. They were approaching Earth, returning for the formal establishment of the Interspecies Diplomatic Corps, an expansion of the Cohesion Fleet's mandate. Prime moved to the viewing port as the blue-white marble of humanity's homeworld came into view. The Predator stood sentinel, 6 eyes, taking in the planet that had once sought only to contain or destroy its kind. Alara joined Prime at the window. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, the translator off. She no longer needed it for simple exchanges. They had developed their own shorthand, a blend of gestures and sounds unique to their relationship. Prime made a low, rumbling sound that Alara had come to associate with contentment or agreement. One massive arm extended slightly, the back of a claw brushing against her shoulder in a gesture of what she could only interpret as affection. 3 years ago, that same appendage would have, torn her apart without hesitation. Now it communicated connection, partnership, even friendship. The galactic menagerie had been right about one thing. The Krathoks were indeed apex predators. Evolutionary perfection honed across millennia. But what the database had failed to understand, what no one had understood until Alara's breakthrough, was that the very adaptations that made them perfect killers also gave them unparalleled capacity for cooperation. Their intelligence, their social structures, their ability to read and respond to the subtlest environmental cues, all of these had evolved for hunting. Yes, but contained within them the seeds of something greater. As Earth grew larger in the viewport, Alara thought about the future they were building. Not one of dominance and subjugation, but of understanding and mutual respect. Not perfect, not without challenges, but fundamentally transformed from the fear-based approaches of the past. "We've come a long way," she said softly. Prime made the trilling sound that had become their shared acknowledgement, a sound that needed no translation. Together, predator and human, they watched the approach to a world that had been forever changed by their unlikely alliance.